He traded goods for our dinner, then demanded I pay for my free meal after I said no to his second date. It started like any ordinary first date, with hope, nerves, and maybe a touch of excitement. I, 28F, had been talking to this guy, 32M, on a dating app for a few days. Our conversations weren't groundbreaking, but he seemed intelligent, confident, and charming in that sort of casual, practiced way. He suggested we meet at a restaurant he loved, one he described as a bit of a hidden gem. I agreed, thinking it might be nice to try something new and see where things led. When I pulled into the restaurant parking lot, he was already there, standing outside with a medium-sized cardboard box tucked under one arm. I made a light-hearted comment, something like, "Is that for me?" And he laughed. "Work stuff," he said, brushing it off. He explained that the restaurant owners were his clients. He worked in sales, though what he sold was left deliberately vague. I didn't think much of it at the time. I figured maybe he had to drop something off. No big deal. But almost as soon as we walked inside, he vanished. He handed me over to the hostess with a quick, "I'll be right back," and disappeared into the back with his mysterious box. I was led to a table and seated, alone. At first, I assumed he'd be back in a minute or two. I checked my phone, scanned the room, made polite eye contact with the waitress who came by to take drink orders. I asked for water, trying to act casual, even though I was already starting to feel uncomfortable. 5 minutes passed, then 10, then 15. 15 minutes. Alone, on a first date, sitting at a table with nothing but condensation on a half-empty water glass, while my date did God knows what behind the scenes. It was awkward. I felt abandoned, embarrassed. I even wondered briefly if he was standing me up mid-date. It was a bizarre situation I hadn't prepared for. When he finally returned, he didn't offer an apology or even acknowledge the time I'd spent waiting. He just slid into the booth across from me like nothing had happened. I forced a smile, but my guard was already going up. Still, I told myself to stay open-minded. Maybe he had urgent work stuff. Maybe he was nervous. Maybe I was overreacting. We started talking, but he kept delaying ordering. "Let's chat first," he said, waving the menus aside. So I sat, again, just sipping water, making conversation. The waitress returned twice to see if we were ready. Both times, he told her we needed a few more minutes. It took nearly 45 minutes before I even looked at a menu. By then, I'd been seated for almost an hour with nothing in front of me but water and red flags. Still, I stayed. I listened. I gave him the benefit of the doubt. Spoiler, I shouldn't have. When we finally got around to ordering, I was starving. I hadn't eaten anything since lunch, and now it was well past dinner time. I glanced at the menu, but honestly, my mind was elsewhere, still replaying those first awkward moments of the night. He finally ordered his steak, and I chose a pasta dish. The waiter left, and just as I was beginning to relax, he leaned in with this smug grin and dropped a bombshell. "I don't actually pay for meals here," he said casually. I blinked, unsure if I'd heard right. "What do you mean?" I asked. He explained that he trades his goods, whatever they are, with restaurants he knows. The products have a retail value, sure, but his cost to acquire them is much lower. So instead of paying for dinner, he offers the restaurant items in exchange for free meals. It's like a barter system, he said, a win-win. I was stunned. I mean, I get bartering in business, but this was a date. The very idea of sitting there, unknowingly part of some trade deal, felt surreal. It was like I'd been a prop in a sales pitch rather than a potential romantic interest. He pulled out the same box from the car, claiming that's what he'd given the restaurant owners earlier, goods worth more than our meal. So technically, he hadn't spent a dime. Yet here I was, sitting across from a guy who treated our evening like a business transaction disguised as dinner. I tried to brush it off and focus on the conversation, but it was hard. He dominated the talk with stories about sales and deals, making it clear his mind was on business rather than connection. Every once in a while, he glanced at the door, maybe thinking about his next client or his next trade. The meal itself was fine, nothing special. But the atmosphere was strange, like I was the audience for a performance rather than a participant in a date. The charm I'd expected was nowhere to be found. Instead, I was left wondering whether this whole thing was just an elaborate way for him to get a free meal under the guise of romance. By the end, I knew this wasn't going anywhere. I wasn't interested in pursuing things further, and I felt no spark, no chemistry, nothing that made me want a second meeting. The waiter never brought a bill. Why would he? The dinner was covered. The staff even waved us off with smiles and nods, like this was business as usual. We said our goodbyes in the parking lot. He hugged me, wished me well, and I drove home feeling disappointed, confused, and a little used. The next day, I thought I was done with it. I'd send him a polite text letting him know I didn't feel a spark and wasn't interested in seeing him again. Simple, clear, mature. But then his reply hit me like a gut punch. I think you owe me $40 for your half of the meal. Wait, what? I stare at my phone. I reread the message. Surely, this was a joke or some kind of twisted prank. But no, he was dead serious. He went on to explain that it's customary for a woman to pay her share if she decides the date is a one-time thing. Like it was some unwritten rule in the dating universe. An expectation I'd somehow violated by simply being honest. I was floored. First, the meal wasn't paid for by him. He literally didn't pay a cent. He traded some box of goods, products he probably didn't even pay full retail price for, to the restaurant in exchange for 2 dinners. That a business deal, not a personal favor. Second, he acted like I was the one trying to get something for nothing, as if I had some hidden agenda, a scam, or a master plan to freeload. But I didn't know about the barter until well into the date. And honestly, I wasn't even trying to get anything for free. I was trying to meet someone new to see if there was a connection. And instead of accepting my decision gracefully, he doubled down. You wasted my time, he said. You should do the decent thing. Wasted his time? He left me alone for 15 minutes when we arrived. He delayed ordering for nearly an hour. He turned a first date into a business negotiation. And now he wants me to pay him for his lost time? No. I told him no, that I wouldn't be paying for a meal he didn't pay for. That wasn't my responsibility. And frankly, I didn't appreciate being treated like some kind of meal ticket. The whole exchange left me stunned and honestly a little angry. I went on a date, tried to be polite and patient, then ended it respectfully. Instead of accepting that, he tried to guilt me into reimbursing him for what he called his expenses, though those expenses were covered by a business deal that had nothing to do with me. This wasn't a date. It was a bait and switch, a business transaction masquerading as a night out. Since that last message, I've stayed silent. Because honestly, what can I say to someone who treats a first date like a business deal and then tries to send me a bill for his losses? I keep replaying the whole night, the awkward silence, the long wait, the strange barter explanation, and I'm just baffled by the sheer gall. He didn't pay for my meal. He didn't pay for his meal. The restaurant didn't bring us a bill. He literally traded some product he sells in exchange for 2 dinners. That's a deal between him and a restaurant, not a personal expense he fronted for me. And yet, here I am, getting texts demanding money for a meal that was never actually paid for out of his own pocket. The implication that I schemed this whole thing to get a free meal is insulting. I sat there waiting alone, trying to be patient, trying to make conversation with someone clearly distracted by business. I gave him the benefit of the doubt when he disappeared, when he delayed ordering, when he treated the evening like a networking event rather than a date. When I finally told him honestly that I didn't feel a spark, I expected an adult response, a thanks for your honesty, or all the best. Instead, I got a bill and a guilt trip. This isn't about $40. It's about principle. It's about being used, being turned into a commodity in a deal I never signed up for. I didn't agree to be a client, a prospect, or an unpaid business partner. I went on a date hoping for connection, not a transaction. So Reddit, I'm asking you, AITA for refusing to pay my date for a meal he never actually paid for, just because I didn't want to see him again?